Hey there! I'm author Sarah A. Chrisman, and today I'm going to talk to you about the history of spas, with special focus on the Victorian spas in French Lick and West Baden Springs, Indiana. Three Women a Wheel, Book 6 of the Tales of Chetzemoka, recounts a trip to Longmire's mineral springs on Mount Rainier, undertaken by our Chetzemoka lady cyclist friends Addie, Lizzie, and Awkward Ethel. Longmire's resort was a real place situated on a natural hot spring, and it was every bit as primitive as it appears in the story. Elsewhere, however, various other Victorian spas were far more luxurious and opulent. In the story, Ethel recalls famous spas she'd visited in Europe when her aunt took her on a grand tour. Some of these old-world mineral springs go back to Roman, Sumerian, or even prehistoric times when they were honored as the sacred spaces of pagan water deities. In 1800 BC, the Minoans were already using terracotta baths similar to modern ones, and besides the Minoans having both bathtubs and flush toilets nearly 4,000 years ago, their king, King Minos, already had hot and cold running water pipes in his palace. The spa tradition in Bath, England goes back to a legendary shepherd king's discovery of the healing springs there, and the baths of ancient Rome were positively epic. At its height, Rome had so many public baths and they were so popular, Roman water use averaged about 300 gallons per citizen per day. Now granted, when looking at Roman records like this, one should read per citizen as what we would now call per household, but it's still a fantastic amount of water, representing a fantastic amount of luxuriant bathing. Besides leaving a lot of spa infrastructure throughout the Old World, the Romans also left us the tradition of connecting libraries with their bathing spaces. The recorded history of spas in America may not be as old and venerable as that of Europe, but nevertheless, by the late Victorian era, the more settled parts of the United States could boast of some very impressive spas indeed. The town of West Baden, Indiana, is proud home to a particularly lovely mineral springs resort from the turn of the 20th century. It's recently been restored to its old grandeur and reopened for visitors again. Its history has things in common with other American spas of its day, so let's take a closer look at this dazzling gem of a place. It all started when local wildlife, most importantly bison, came to take advantage of natural salt licks in the area, created by mineral-rich waters bubbling up out of the ground. Hunters from the Piankashaw and Shawnee tribes came to harvest the game, but the waters of the springs were too full of salt and other minerals to meet their everyday needs, and they had their permanent settlements elsewhere closer to more drinkable sources of fresh water. The only records of indigenous people living year-round by the salty springs are tantalizingly incomplete. 18th century settlers reported a man they called King Billy living there along with his red-haired wife. Now this intriguing description certainly makes one wish those settlers had written down more details of the early couple, but at this point any guesses we might make about them would be pure conjecture. French fur trappers were drawn to the area in the 18th century by the same wildlife which had long made the Piankashaw and the Shawnee frequent visitors. When French traders established a permanent settlement on the Salt Lick, it acquired the reasonably intuitive name of French Lick. As soon as there was a permanent settlement and trading post established there, more and more settlers made the place a stopping point. The history of French Lick as a resort town began when Dr. William Bowles purchased property there in the mid-19th century. In 1844, he started a rough inn for travelers, simple rooms in a 40-foot by 100-foot frame building. Although it possessed nothing of the grandeur of the later hotels in the vicinity, this first inn at French Lick was a popular one for weary travelers. He may have chosen a good location, but Dr. Bowles became distracted from his innkeeping duties when he got into increasingly serious legal troubles. First, he was indicted for grave robbing. Then he faced a court of inquiry for his conduct in the Mexican-American War. And then finally, during the American Civil War, he was convicted and jailed for treason because of his involvement with the Confederacy, and he only narrowly avoided execution. The The South's surrender at Appomattox cleared up the treason business, but while Dr. Bowles was preoccupied with his variety of questionable life choices, he was leasing his property at French Lick to Dr. John Lane, who was doing quite well with the hotel business and was happy there. When Dr. Bowles slipped away from his various legal entanglements and told Dr. Lane he was taking his property back, Lane was reluctant to leave a place where he'd been so successful. However, rather than pick a fight with a former body snatcher with a questionable war record, Dr. Lane chose the more peaceable, out-of-the-box approach of opening his own, bigger hotel just a mile up the road. Since Dr. Lane's hotel was 1 mile from French Lick, the first name he gave his establishment was the Mile Lick Inn. It was a crucial point for the spa business which would develop that Dr. Lane's new hotel was close enough to French Lick to access the same mineral waters that soon became the area's main draw. Dr. Lane's Mile Lick Inn was later renamed West Baden to associate it with the great watering places of Europe. Today, the cities of French Lick and West Baden, Indiana, each have their own fire departments, police departments, and separate other municipal perks one expects from cities, but they're so close and flow into each other so seamlessly that by this point they're not so much twin cities as they are conjoined twin cities. Competition between the inns at French Lick and West Baden led to increasingly bigger and more opulent facilities. By the year 1900, the inn at West Baden Springs had its own dairy, its own electrical plant which provided light to all its rooms, a swimming pool, a dance hall, its own ice plant, a gymnasium, handball courts and tennis courts, an opera house, a baseball diamond, and a double-decker bicycle and equestrian track which converted to a promenade at night. Even with all these tempting attractions, the primary draw to the area remained the mineral waters, which by now were credited with near-magical powers. A brochure for the West Baden Inn from the turn of the 20th century claimed the waters from its springs could cure everything from alcoholism to sterility. Some of these claims stretched plausibility a bit far, but everyone did agree that the waters had a strong laxative effect. Another very obvious effect of the mineral waters here was that they combined very poorly with alcohol, so the claim that they could cure alcoholism did have some foundation to it. Guests at the West Baden Springs Hotel would pose for photos sitting on the water wagon, and the waters had such a reputation for curing alcoholism that if someone did start drinking alcohol again, they were said to have fallen off the wagon, or folks just said that they fell off the wagon. One more element of the French Lick and West Baden waters that science can attest to is that they contain high levels of naturally occurring lithium. Lithium is essential for healthy brain function, and people with too little of it in their systems experience extreme depression. So it's not surprising that many people reported increased feelings of happiness and well-being after taking the waters at West Baden and French Lick. French Lick's Pluto waters, as it was called, continued to be bottled and sold through much of the 20th century. But then in 1971, the Food and Drug Administration decided these natural waters contained too much lithium to be sold over the counter, and the bottling plant had to find other work for its employees. By then the springs at neighboring West Baden had already been shut down for other reasons, but I'm getting ahead of myself. At the turn of the 20th century, business was booming, but then on June 15, 1901, a fire broke out in the kitchen at the West Baden Inn. It quickly spread to the rest of the structure. Everyone made it out safely, but the West Baden Inn was completely destroyed. That might have been the end of things for the hotel at West Baden, but the Sinclair family, who owned the inn at that point, decided that an even bigger and more amazing structure should rise, phoenix-like, from the ashes of the old one. In less than 1 year, a brilliant architect and a veritable army of workers erected a fireproof concrete structure modeled after the Pantheon in Rome. It was heavily influenced by neoclassical themes, and a few years after it opened, extensive decorating would fashion it after the archaeology of Pompeii. The West Baden Dome is 200 feet in diameter, and at the time of its construction was the largest dome, and in fact the largest single room, in the world. Its roof contains more than 20,000 square feet of glass, which is more than the famous Crystal Palace from the 1851 exposition in London. The building around West Baden's 200-foot dome is 343 feet in diameter, and steel girders supporting the dome pivot so that they can expand and contract in Indiana's hot summers and cold winters. When the new hotel opened for business, amazed visitors declared it to be the 8th wonder of the world. Over the course of the 20th century, the grand hotels at French Lick and West Baden went through a variety of different hands and suffered the slings and arrows of economic misfortunes. The Great Depression was a particularly severe blow for West Baden, and in 1934 the then owner of the West Baden Hotel was so far gone in debts that he gave away this wonder of the world for the paltry and symbolic sum of $1 slim dollar. The new owners were a group of Jesuits who were uncomfortable with the ostentatious paganism of the neoclassical structure. They stripped off many of the decorations and even some of the architectural features, and the springs named after the ancient deities of Hygeia and Apollo were filled with cinders and capped with concrete. It was a dark time for the neoclassicists. In 1964, the Jesuits decided that the West Baden structure was too much trouble and they abandoned it. 2 years later, the property was purchased by wealthy philanthropists who donated it to Northwood College. The college restored it as best they could, and the building was a university campus until 1983. Still more hard times in the economy of the Midwest shut it down yet again, and by the mid-1990s, the structure was actively collapsing. The plaster ceiling was falling down in chunks. There was standing water on the floors of the once fine restaurant, and even the fireproof concrete walls were crumbling. Luckily for history, another wealthy buyer and a grassroots campaign to legalize gambling in Indiana brought in the money needed to restore the West Baden Springs Hotel and the nearby French Lick Hotel. Today, both these hotels, former rivals, are now owned by the same people. The Byzantine towers removed from West Baden by the Jesuits have been rebuilt and replaced, and both structures have been fully restored to their former grandeur. French Lick has the casino and frequently hosts concerts. The atmosphere at West Baden is considerably more laid back and luxuriantly relaxing, with a beautiful private library, fine dining, and shops around the rotunda. Truly, this is a place where the community is keeping history alive in the most beautiful way possible. Thank you for watching today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a nice thumbs up, and remember to tell your friends about my books. Happy reading!